Nobody objects. If I can find my script here, I will start our meeting. Welcome to the January 7th, 2025 meeting of the Planning Board. First, we'll take a roll call to introduce board members and staff. Kate Nee.
Aye. Oh, here. Aye. Yes, I also say yes to Kate.
Sean Willer.
Here and I.
Phil Giordano.
I'll go with both. I and here.
I'm Ellen Rawlings. I am here, and I will also say aye for consistency. We're also joined by Elijah Romulus, who is our town planner, Amanda Wolf, who is our housing and land use planner, Jess Cole, our recording secretary, Nora Loughnane, our director of community and economic development, and Jack Hatfield from Westwood Media Center. Did I miss anybody? I do not think I did. All right. This meeting is recorded by Westwood Media Center and broadcast live on local cable television Comcast Channel 6 and Verizon Channel 42. Meetings are also live on the Westwood Media Center's YouTube channel. If you're interested in joining the meeting via Zoom, you can find the login directions in the Planning Board meeting notice that is posted to the calendar section of the town's webpage at https://www.townhall.westwood.ma.us/. We'll begin the meeting with only the board members and staff unmuted and on video. As the chair recognizes individuals to speak, we will unmute them. Board members may choose to mute themselves when they're not speaking in order to minimize background noise. For applications, the chair will first invite the applicant to address the board and give a presentation summarizing what is being requested. Board members receive the application materials prior to the meeting and will have reviewed them. Board members may ask questions during and following the presentation. Staff and outside experts will provide comments to the board. If the issue includes a public hearing, the board will then proceed to the public comment portion of the public hearing and will restate the instructions. In this remote meeting format, residents and guests may participate in several ways. Attendees should raise their hand and wait to be unmuted and recognized to speak over the Zoom meeting application or from a telephone dial-up. We will be able to hear you but not see you. Additionally, comments may be submitted by email or regular mail prior to the meeting. When we come to that part of the meeting, I will remind everyone of the process. Following the public comment portion, the board will deliberate and make a decision or continue the hearing to a specific future date. All remote meetings require that votes be taken by roll call. When a motion and second has been made, the chair will ask if there is any further discussion before proceeding to a roll call vote and will then restate the results of the vote. All right. Elijah, do we have any changes to our agenda this evening?
No, we do not.
All right. Well, with that, then I will start with item number 1, 637 High Street, continuation of public hearing for the consideration of an environmental impact and design review approval for proposed new fire station 1 at 637 High Street, continued from 11/19/24. We expect to immediately close this hearing without discussion. No changes to that expectation, I believe.
That is correct. And I guess just for folks that are out there listening, this was continued to this date. The board already made a decision on it. It was open in the event that the Conservation Commission at their December 11th, 2024 meeting were to make any changes to the site plan. However, that did not occur.
Perfect. Then, yes, Phil.
Yeah, I watched the select board meeting last night, but I'm wondering if town council has given his opinion that it's appropriate to close it as compared to continuing it, given what's going on with respect to the pending lawsuit.
I spoke to town council. Oh, Nora's got her hand raised.
Yes, we have town council's opinion is that the hearing should be closed. There's no further business before this board.
Thank you. Good question, Phil. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Then if that is our advice, if someone would like to make a motion.
Yeah, I move that the planning board close the public hearing for consideration of EIDR approval of the new fire station 1 at 637 High Street.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll take roll call. Kate?
Aye.
Sean?
Aye.
Phil?
Aye.
I vote aye as well. Motion carries. The public hearing is closed. Thank you. All right, our next agenda item is 1652 High Street. My screen's not loading, but I Have it here. Consideration of a request for a second modification to an environmental impact and design review approval to extend the deadline to implement traffic circulation, fencing, and other site alterations associated with the introduction of a food truck on the property at 1652 High Street. All right. Elijah, do we have anyone here? Oh, hi. Yes, Alex,
Sorry,
welcome.
Hulk. Yeah, we're requesting this because Marie from Bubbling Brook, she was saying that so we went to get a negative request for determination of applicability from the Concom because she wanted to take the concrete pad and put it right next to the little shed area that exists to get it out of the main drive aisle for safety purposes. And it was really hard to put a fence around it, which was part of the EIDR. And so we went to the Concom, got that, and then she had the contractor lined up to do the work, and he started doing the work and then immediately got sick, and we weren't able to finish it prior to the end of the new year, which is why she's requesting um, the extension on that.
Any comments or input from staff?
Yes, I originally had put in the summary to consider continuing or extending their time to execute to February 28th. However, upon further discussion, I thought it would be best if the board is inclined to grant an extension to March 31st in the event that there's any winter weather. I did speak with Marie before the meeting. They do plan on opening April 2nd. And so that wouldn't, the work would be completed prior to the beginning of the, spring season. And to date, they have already completed some of the work. And I think that they're doing the best that they can as from the applicant side. So I don't see an issue with the board granting an extension request.
Thank you. I'd like to open up to board member questions or comments on this.
I don't have any questions or comments. I'd be happy to make a motion if I could see one.
Yes.
Thank
I
you.
think we have, this is a two-step process, right, Elijah?
Yes, it would be a motion to determine whether it's a minor or major modification, and then there would be a motion to approve. Let's see if I can zoom in. Yes.
Thank you. I move that the planning board determine the modification of the environmental impact design review approval for 1652 High Street as described in the application, therefore submitted to the planning board and filed in the office of the town clerk on January 2nd, 2025 to be minor in nature.
I second the motion.
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll take roll call. Phil?
Aye.
Sean?
Aye.
Kate?
Aye.
I vote aye as well. Motion carries. I'll entertain the second motion.
I move that the planning board grant the minor modification of the environmental impact design review EIDR approval for 1652 High Street as described in the application, therefore submitted to the planning board and filed in the office of the town clerk on January 2nd, 2025, subject to the following conditions. 1, except as modified by the conditions and finding hereof, the project shall comply with the project plans and with the conditions of all prior decisions for the property in all respects, and the applicant shall pursue completion of the project with reasonable diligence and continuity. 2, if the project or any condition imposed in this decision requires any other permit, license, or other approval from any town of Westwood board, commission, or agency, or other Commonwealth or federal regulatory agency, the applicant shall make an appropriate application for the same and shall obtain all required approvals prior to the start of any work. If any condition of such permit, license, or other approval from any other board, committee, or agency is inconsistent with this decision, the applicant shall make application to the planning board for an amendment of this decision, and the planning board shall consider such application in accordance with the requirements of Mass General Law, Chapter 40A, Section 9, and all applicable planning board rules and regulations. 3, thank you. Any proposed alterations, modifications, deletions, or changes to the decision shall be requested in writing to the town planner and building commissioner prior to implementation. A, proposed alterations which are considered de minimis by the building commissioner may be accepted as a note to the file. B, proposed alterations which are considered minor by the building commissioner shall require the filing of a modification application of said approval for review by the planning board at a publicly posted planning board meeting. C, proposed alterations which are determined to be major by the building commissioner or by the planning board shall be considered by the planning board as a formal amendment to the approval and will require a new public hearing before the planning board. 4, applicant to paint arrows in a prominent manner and add right turn only signage in parking lot indicating the flow of traffic per the intent expressed by the planning board at the July 16, 2024 meeting, and provide an updated site plan indicating such on or before March 31st, 2025, or this approval will be void. 5, applicant to include barriers around the food truck location per the intent expressed by the planning board at the July 16, 2024 meeting, and provide an updated site plan indicating such on or before March 31st, 2025, or this approval will be void. 6, the applicant shall submit a plan and specifications for a new dumpster enclosure, which shall be in full compliance with applicable zoning bylaw and general bylaw requirements to the town planner for review and approval, and following approval shall install said dumpster enclosure on or before March 31st, 2025.
I second the motion.
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll take roll call. Sean,
Aye.
Kate,
Aye.
Phil?
Aye.
I vote aye as well. Motion carries. Thank you very much, and
Thank
good
you.
luck with the rest of the
Thank
work.
you.
Yep,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Sorry, I was late joining. Thank you.
No worries. Thanks for coming.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye. All right. Our next agenda item then is number 3, design guidelines. Sorry, my screen is being very slow to load. Continued discussion of potential planning board design guidelines for environmental impact and design review and/or special permit applications. And Sean, are you taking point on this?
I'm happy to. I'll defer to town staff first if you want me to take the lead, I'm happy to, or if you'd something to say yourselves first, welcome as well.
Sure, I can make an introduction. So basically, this is a continuation of the discussion from December's meeting. We looked through design guidelines with Sean, and we're trying to update the document that was sent out at the last meeting to have a clear scope and kind of a pathway to establishing not only a design guidelines task force, but also kind of what would be looked at for said task force. So I think that the updated document, which I included in the meeting package as of Monday morning, did look to be in a good place. And the goal would be, pending discussion tonight, to look at establishing a task force at the next meeting with a properly advertised agenda for said item. And I can pass it off to Sean.
Yep. Thanks, Elijah. And I have to give some kudos to Elijah and Amanda for taking some meeting notes when I met with them and then making some changes to the document to update it. And then I just kind of came in and scrambled things around a little bit. So I do think this document's in a good place. I'm happy to point out just a few things here that I think are important for the board's consideration. Number one, when we started this conversation, I think we were using the word standards and guidelines interchangeably. After some discussion with town staff, we have structured this proposal as a proposal for the establishment of a design guidelines task force and not a standards task force. Two reasons for that. I believe some guidelines would offer more flexibility to applicants, and I think it's consistent with what a lot of other towns do. If you look around at the types of design guidelines or standards other towns have, the language I see most commonly for a project like this would be guidelines. Secondly, our bylaw itself uses the term design standards. So you might see sections of the bylaw that say performance and design standards or just design standards. I certainly don't want to create any confusion between this and the bylaw. This is being done, with reference to the bylaw, but it's a layer, it's got sort of more of a regulatory purpose or layer beyond sort of the hard-coded bylaw itself. So that's a major point number one. Number two, we've elucidated some of the goals here to make it a little more crisp and respond to some of the feedback from the last meeting. So 4 major goals, and probably my fault that they aren't all bolded, but number 1 is to create cohesive design guidelines. 2, support the integration with the zoning bylaw. 3, enable flexibility while still ensuring the guidelines will be useful. And then 4, to prioritize usability. Make sure it's an appropriate reference guide for those who need to use this document. So I think that reflects some of the feedback and conversation from the last meeting, but we're certainly open to other ideas or goals that you all have for this work that you might want to include. Elijah, let me make one more point on that first page.
Oh.
Or Amanda, sorry, which is
Okay.
scope. I think initially we had some conversation about what does this task force bite off and chew and focus on? And there's town centers. There was some discussion about perhaps including FMUOD because those special permits have some flexibility in them as well and some room to consider something like this. Ultimately, we left that kind of on the table off to the side for now and are really going to focus on town centers, High Street area, Washington Street area, and University Avenue. Certainly, again, if that's something that you all would like to recommend a different approach on, open to your opinions and thoughts on that as well. Let me think.
Sean,
Yes.
if I can add one thing to clarify, it would apply to University Ave, but not
yes.
University Station, because that's all part of a master design.
Yep, the idea would be to focus on the areas of University Avenue outside of the University Station master plan, but hopefully I think develop some guidelines that would bring projects in those areas a bit more into the consistency and feel of some of the great stuff we have at University Station. So although that'd be up to kind of the planning board to make a decision on what those should look like in the task force to make a proposal. Let me think if there's anything else later down in the document. I think we've just clarified some items around scope and what design features will be focused on. I still think there's enough flexibility in here that if the task force gets into the meat of the work and has a particularly strong recommendation in one direction or another, they could come in and make that recommendation to the planning board and change the scope appropriately. Moving down further, some of the key deliverables, beyond focusing on geographic boundaries of where these would apply, the most important deliverable for the planning board will be the draft design guidelines document, as well as recommendations on zoning bylaw amendments that the task force may have for enabling enforcement of the guidelines as kind of desired and appropriate by the planning board. But we'll also put together a public engagement report to try to keep track of what we hear from stakeholders and an implementation strategy to help us make this work in practice. And then finally, there's a lot I'll leave to you all to look at yourself and evaluate before the next meeting, or even to make comments on this meeting. But the proposed membership of this. Last meeting, we discussed taking this down from, I think, a longer list to 3 to 7 proposed members. And I had some conversation with our town staff afterwards. I think this could include up to 2 planning board members and then some desired categories of expertise. But certainly if one of these were not to materialize, I don't think it would prevent the task force from moving forward. Then I'll make a final comment on sort of the resident inclusion in this process. We would certainly have interested residents selected through an application process. In talking with town staff, I heard the opinion that it actually might be preferred for a project like this to have residents who might have no previous board experience or committee involvement or have more fairly, maybe they've been recently appointed to something, but are kind of wading into town a little more. And I think that makes sense as well from the standpoint of kind of bringing new voices into the fold who might enjoy getting engaged with something like this and even stay and continues to stay to be engaged with the town on these types of projects, because we can always use more hands around here, I think. So let me pause there, and I'll kind of defer back to Madam Chair if you want to take the discussion in a certain direction.
Oh, sure. I actually would like to just open the discussion up because first I want to thank you and town staff for the amount of time you've all put into this. I personally am very excited about the idea of handing some sort of checklist to developers that I think it could streamline parts of our meetings if they come understanding what we're looking for. It helps guide their design from the get-go without being too restrictive. So I like the idea of guidelines. Well, I'm going to let everyone else talk first, but yes, thank you for your time. And I would love to open up the discussion to our colleagues. Phil.
John and staff, I was very impressed with this. I have some questions and just to generate discussion. By having guidelines as compared to standards, we are saying that, and then enabling flexibility. These are a measuring stick, but not requirements. Is that the consensus that we're trying to achieve or not? Because that to me, that was the biggest confusion I had with this document, because we go into enabling, amending bylaws, doing a bunch of stuff in here that implicitly indicates that there's going to be a requirement. And then there's other places where I think it actually does indicate a requirement. And that to me is a kind of like a real macro goal. As to what are we doing? And that's my first question. Are we putting something that is a stick in the ground, or are we saying this is a measuring stick by which you must meet this, whether we use the word guideline or standard, it's still, when someone says enable enforcement implies that it is a requirement. It doesn't imply, it says that. So I toss that out for discussion, then I have some other questions.
Sean, if I may, Madam Chair.
Yeah.
I think the idea with guidelines is to give that flexibility, but then at the same time, once and if that set of guidelines is established, then say there's a special permit that is coming up, then the board has more. With the special permit, the board has more purview, but then to turn to guidelines to be specifically like, this is why we are conditioning such and such based on our established design guidelines, that gives the board more to lean on. And then at the same time, yes, there is flexibility with other applications as presented to the board, so that it's not too onerous, but at the same time does have the ability for the board to turn to and direct the applicant.
I understand the point of my question. I'm looking for clarity. I actually think what you're saying, Elijah, is what I would prefer, which is, but then the idea of enabling enforcement and amending a bylaw, which gets into things of requirements. I think we just have to kind of make sure that we kind of keep that as this is something by which we are to be guided, not to otherwise require, Joe Blow who comes in and wants to develop the parcels that are, on Washington Street near Roach Brothers, which would be really great and do all these wonderful things. And we can certainly push them in a special permit, but it's not a requirement, which could end up. My concern is it could be, if it was a requirement, which is why I'm saying I agree with you, it could be an impediment as compared to
Right.
something to get them, to understand where we're coming from. I see Amanda.
Definitely.
I'll jump in because I have a bunch of other questions, and if Amanda wants to jump in on my point, that's fine.
Yeah, so I think it would be helpful. One thing that Sean had said when we were discussing, the way he put it when it came to bylaw amendments was, as they're going through the process, is there anything in the current bylaw that is actively getting in the way of a certain guideline that they want? So is, a setback an impediment to something, something like that. So that's where that piece comes in, is looking at recommendations for the future that can more align with the vision established by the task force.
And that makes sense. Is, I guess, as long, and that's where I was looking for clarity, as long as we're not trying to incorporate guidelines into bylaw is what.
I don't believe so.
Okay,
We certainly
that was
could.
the thing that I was a little confused about, and
We could
I was
certainly,
hoping that we were not going to have.
and I think I'm hoping the task force can make a recommendation to this regard as well, to say, we've looked at this carefully, we've looked at what 15 other towns have done, and this is how they do it. And perhaps they do come back and they say, hey, there's a clause in these other towns' bylaws that say, projects should try to reasonably be designed with the guidelines in mind, or something. Maybe there is something there. I do not anticipate that here in Westwood we would ever set a bylaw, nor would this task force likely propose a bylaw. They can't speak for the potential future task force that would certainly try to create sort of hard-coded rules of enforcement,
And that's
linking back to guidelines. And I
that's
think
exactly that's my thought process that I wanted
yeah.
just us to kind of
And
like discuss.
on the flip side, if the task force is looking at something and they say, gee, we should really, there is one thing that we do really want all applicants to do, and maybe it's on High Street. We want everyone's kind of setback to be within a certain band as opposed to it just being a minimum. Then they can come back and say, hey, here would be 3 targeted bylaw changes we'd make, just based on all of our work. It's a recommendation to the planning board. It need not be considered, but most of this we think can be handled with guidelines, but there's a few things we feel are important that wouldn't necessarily be onerous to applicants, or may even be the opposite. They may provide even more kind of opportunities, but I think you'd give the task force that room to make some of those recommendations if they really feel strongly about something.
It also, because there's also different process if we're going to be changing bylaws as compared to just
Right,
creating
exactly.
guidelines.
Yeah.
So that's a separate issue.
Yeah.
And then in the kind of prioritization, if there's a conflict between a guideline and the bylaw is going to control,
Yeah.
but it's also subject to a special permit process where we can still be guided by what our guidelines are. This is all very, very good. I like that. Another question I had is, we say that it's a blueprint for all new construction and significant renovation, separate from, the 3 nodes, the 3 areas. So we're going commercial and residential. If it is new or essentially a completely major, I don't want to say, gut and redo, but it's where is the point at which, and I say this particularly where we have commercial, we have mixed use, and we have residential. And if someone is looking to do, a home on Gay Street versus, or some property that's on Washington Street or something like that, where do we draw the line? And then is any of this, and this is posed as a question, intended to be also a guideline for any aspect of municipal parcels, as we've, had that issue arise. So that's a big open-ended blob of a question, but that generated a lot of questions when I read.
I know town staff will have perspectives on this too, but let me give mine really quick if you'll humor me. First, I think you raise a good question, which is sort of where's the limit of where this applies or not? And
Right.
one answer would be, let's have the task force look at that question and try to provide an answer. The second is there are some very hard limits in the bylaw, right? So single family residences are, to my knowledge, never subject to the planning board's environmental impact and design review approval in Westwood. So no single family residence would ever fall under this. This would apply to things outside of that and outside of two-family dwellings as well. So the things that we would normally expect to see as the planning board, anything from commercial to kind of industrial projects, offices, multifamily residences, anything mixed use. I believe that this would apply in those cases because those are the things covered under our environmental impact and design review. Also included in that are municipal properties and municipal developments. Those are covered like everything else with no prejudice one way or the other under our environmental impact and design review process. So it certainly would apply in those cases. Now, if one of your concerns is, say, the town needs a little more flexibility because of the oddities of municipal projects and some of the costs involved, I think that's where, going back to your previous question, the benefit of these being guidelines comes in. It can be a guide for the town, just like any applicant to start with, but it's not a straitjacket. So that's
taking that a step further, if you have, suppose something does come within our purview on a home, a subdivision, or something else, and therefore it does come within our purview, are we going to, I don't want to say fence off, but we put that as not as part of the consideration, or do we? And again, these are questions I'm posing, and I see others are ready to. I love asking questions. I just love just stirring the pot. That's what I do. Go ahead, Elijah.
Yes, yes. So good questions. The intent of this document is really to focus on the kind of town villages and nodes. So it would be the High Street area, the Islington area, and then the University Ave area. So my thought would be this task force may look at exactly what are those bounds for those village centers, and then
should we make it exclusive? Because then we could roll it out as we have a learning curve to guide us on other non-node parcels or something else.
That is a good question.
That's why I'm a lawyer.
Yes. Definitely something to think about before the next planning board meeting.
All right. I'll let Amanda answer me, and then I know Kate wants to jump in because she's had her hand up. So I have more questions, but I don't want to monopolize.
We'll loop back around. Thanks. Amanda, yes.
So I'll just add that, a set of guidelines can't give the planning board purview over something they don't already have purview over. So like, for example, with a subdivision, your purview stops at the layout of the road and sidewalks. You have nothing to do with what actually gets built on those properties. So in that case, if there were to be a subdivision on High Street for some reason, which I don't think that's likely, it wouldn't apply because that is not within your purview. So think of just things that would typically come to the planning board already. This would be a guideline, just like the bicycle guidelines apply. Like it's the same idea. It's not giving the planning board any additional control or purview over something that is not already done in the bylaw.
But if we amend a bylaw, it could. True?
Yeah, it's through a bylaw change, but without a bylaw change, you couldn't.
Okay. I'm gonna let Kate jump in before I keep on going.
Wait,
Thanks.
can I make, sorry.
Go ahead, John.
I was just gonna address one final point Phil had, which was sort of the interesting question about this applying to just the village nodes versus being somewhere else. If the final thing that came out of this task force is, something that's kind of laser focused on the village nodes, I still think, we could talk about this in the context of the implementation guide. I still think that if a developer for some property that's not on, say, High Street, but it's nearby, came to the town staff and said, hey, I just want some guidance on what the planning board's going to like or not, so that I don't, design something that's just going to be totally off track and not get my approval. I think town staff could easily, we could talk about it, but I think town staff could hand over the document and say, these guidelines were really written for High Street, not this area 2 blocks off. That said, it reflects the kind of design ethos that the planning board tends to like, and therefore it might be an okay guide for you to kind of approach with. I don't see, I don't anticipate too many issues if you kind of design to this. So that's just a thought in my head. I think, like Elijah said, we can continue thinking about that question to the next meeting. But sorry, Kate, I just wanted to get that thought off my chest before it left.
No, that's great. Madam Chair, are you okay if I go?
Absolutely. You've been
Awesome.
waiting patiently.
Thank you. So I just I love that this is moving forward. I'm really excited about it. I share some of Phil's concerns, but I just want to restate mine, which are I am concerned about the rights of the individual property owner to do what they want with their property, and that they may feel that it diminishes the value of their property if the guidelines are burdensome. So I just want to put that out there. And I do appreciate, because I did hear, Sean, I did hear you say enforcement of the guidelines, and there was like a bell that went off for me, but that's already been discussed. I just want to say, maybe alignment with guidelines, or, some other verb there. And then above, I think it was in the first paragraph or the second paragraph, here it talks about sustainable growth. Where is it?
Page 1. I think sustainable growth is on page 1.
I think it's page 2.
Might be page 2,
under
like
scope.
first
Well,
under
it's
scope.
in the opening paragraph under executive summary, and then
Yeah, sorry. Where it
third
talks,
line, fourth line to the right.
Mhm, mhm. Oh, yes.
thank you. And I would love to strike that word sustainable, because I just think that that's, I don't know. I know it's the executive summary, but it has a few different meanings. I'm concerned about the opportunity to develop and for the town to economically grow. And so I just want to, I'm worried about that word sustainable. I can't tell you more about why. And that might be it. I mean, I'm really like I love it. I'm very concerned that something we're creating could be used in a way that's harmful. So,
Yeah.
my dad used to say, it's not about how you start the car, it's about how you stop the car. So we need to make sure that this thing is not able to be punitive in any way for somebody who wants to use their property the way they want, is what I'm thinking. Thanks.
Thank you, Kate.
Good.
I'm just gonna piggyback on that for a second, because it's kind of like I've been struggling with some of that too, because of course I love the idea of telling people what to do, but obviously, I mean, property owners have rights. So I think for me, what I'm looking for is, like, when I thought about it, I was like, well, if we're talking about a special permit, there is a great deal of discretionary authority that the planning board has. So I see this as like kind of more of a roadmap or a guide, you know, like that these are the kind of things that have come up in the comprehensive plan or that we've heard from residents about what they'd like to see as kind of consistent design features. Like that's how I'm looking at it, is like it's more of like a this is what we'd like to see, and the board may or may not say, gee, we really want to condition that. They might, the board, us or a future board may say, well, you know, we're okay if you do something a little different. I didn't see it as binding, but I saw it more as like a, I always use the Islington Center example. The first design of that was like, to me, it looked like something that you'd see in Miami, and the neighborhood was like, that does not work at all. We want, whereas if we'd had some sort of roadmap for that developer, he might not have wasted time and money on that first design. And that's kind of what I think about when I look at this. So yeah, I agree with Kate. It's like, I think it's a fine line, but I think if it's done sensitive to that, it could be really helpful. But I agree. I don't think we want to do something that would be harmful. So sorry, I usually wait to go last, but it was, I didn't want to like lose my thought. It was really right on what Kate was saying. I think I saw Sean's hands up and then Phil's right after that. And then Kate again.
Yeah, and I'm thinking, Kate, I heard a few things in here. I think some in your comments, I think some of these are easy changes. Taking enforcement to alignment makes sense. I hear your comment on the word, I think, sustainable up there, and I think when it was placed in there, it was placed in there from the context of environmental sustainability, but I also understand that it can be misconstrued sometimes as an excuse to say, hey, we've really got to box in this project. It's not quote unquote sustainable growth for the town, or our services can't sustain this, or XYZ. So let me give some thought to the phrasing of that with town staff. Because we could certainly, I think the document is designed right now is intended to include potentially for the task force and instruction to look at the sustainability portion of the bylaw in a environmental sustainability standpoint, and see if we can crisp up some of our guidance to applicants around that. But the language could certainly be clarified. And then on the last point, I'll echo Alan's comments on this being burdensome versus this making things easier. And maybe this merits a fifth goal being added. That kind of, I'll have to work on the language with town staff, but that suggests, the task force should be looking at this not as a tool to add layers and box people in even more. Everything should be viewed through the lens of how can we free up and make this process easier so that it's as simple, if in a cost neutral way, a developer is just trying to decide between A and B, and we tell them what the A or B is that we want from the start so that we can get to the right place in the first place. And that makes it easier for them, and it makes it easier for us, and it gets us a better outcome as the town. And, leaves enough flexibility in all of it in case somebody's really got a hardship. So I think it's a great point. And let me, if you don't mind, perhaps before the next meeting, I can lock heads with Elijah and Amanda on how we build that into the goals. And I also think, if we have someone who is a commercial property owner involved on this task force, which was always what was being considered, I think, or a builder, for example, these are people who are going to be experts who can give that opinion as the task force goes through its work and say, that would be prohibitive, or that would be onerous, or that just wouldn't work. But here's what actually would be helpful. And I think that's kind of by design. That's by design. So I'll be quiet. Thanks.
Thank you. Phil, yes.
I want to highlight a potential concern, and it's one that I think we can address, but we have to be wary that a particular project or application could use these guidelines against, I don't want to say against us, but to hold it to be what is almost a requirement. So if we are in the middle of an application process and we are now going down, the path of reviewing various things, it would not shock me, and call me a skeptic and a cynic in the world, to have these be held against us if we did not give, it's almost, I don't want to say this is as of right, quote unquote, but it could be postured as if it was as of right. So we have to be language specific and careful as to how it unfolds and how it is utilized, because it would not shock me to see someone who comes in with an application and says, these are your guidelines, you, the planning board, must adhere to them, even though it is not a must. And then, we get into all the problems that, could unfold out of that. So that's just a heads up of me being in the world that I unfortunately sometimes find myself in. So I'll let Kate go, and then I still have a few more things that I wanted to toss out.
Thank you. And I personally appreciate you thinking of the contingencies because that's really helpful. So thank you. Kate, if you don't mind, I did see Elijah's hand go up. Thank you. Elijah and then Kate.
Yeah, I think that is definitely a concern. But at the end of the day, it is the board's decision, and once this set of guidelines were to be established, it will make sure that the language specifically lays it out that it is guidelines and not some type of enforcement document.
Sorry, my computer was just yelling at me that it was going to shut down if I didn't plug it in. So I figured I'd better do that quickly. Kate.
Yeah, thank you. Sean, thank you so much for hearing. I really appreciate that you have heard me. So thank you. I really appreciate that. I want to suggest maybe that goal number 5 might say something about it being a facilitation tool, these being a facilitation tool. Might take some of the enforcement feel out of it. And I do want to, when you talk down further in the document about composition, I don't consider that a realtor would be the same as a builder as far as what they bring to the table. So I don't even necessarily think I need a realtor on there. That although they
I
will know
echo
what
that.
they will know what new residents might be looking for, but I think a builder is going to be the one who knows if they can get a tenant for and what the cost is going to be. I love that you have them listed, but I wouldn't make them one or the other. You know what I mean? Thank you.
Thank you. And before I go back to Phil, I support what Kate said. I think a developer and or builder perspective will be really, really helpful. Realtor would be more of a nice to have from my perspective, but I think one or both of the others would be essential. Phil, yes.
Yes, one of the things that I would, and I think I know what you're saying, but when we're talking about the nodes, we should clarify how the way I read it was, do the guidelines essentially say there's one set of guidelines or there are 3 sets of guidelines? Because it's confusing. So, and in some respects, that is just a function of the physical existence of our town. You have High Street, which has certain distinctions from, Islington, Washington Street, whatever, versus University Avenue. And so I said to myself, okay, we're saying a set of guidelines, but is there a macro version of this and then subsets which apply to nodes? And so it's a point for consideration, because as I read through this and then went through it a few times, I was trying to say to myself, how would I try to implement something that might be University Ave versus High Street versus Washington? And there was a lot of inconsistencies, at least in my own mind. So
Phil, before anybody answers that question, can I go back to something you said before, just to clarify for folks who maybe don't watch this often?
Yep.
Earlier, you were talking about if we change if we change the bylaw. We were talking about something, you were like, if we change the bylaw. I just want to be clear. Planning board doesn't change the bylaw. The town would have to change the bylaw.
Right.
So
I understand.
you and I know, but for folks who
I
are just
totally
listening.
understand.
Yeah.
And I was using a shortened version of what I was saying. So
Gotcha.
I agree.
Yeah.
Thanks. Phil, did you have, sorry.
No, that's just, it's a point to think. There's some word choice that I think we need to be careful on, where we say building types, any project which comes before the planning board or for administrative approval. There's some things that that we would want to tighten up on this. I would suggest that we not to diminish the importance of sustainability and green related energy efficient designs. But I would say we should incorporate by reference what we already have in existence as compared to trying to duplicate efforts. And the point of that is I think we've already talked a lot and have considered a lot of those kinds of things in, and it might predate your time, Sean. But I say to myself, I think we're trying to do a different task here. And sometimes when you try to bite off too much by saying, for example, in your bullet on, sustainability integration, implicit within the entire purpose of the task force is incorporation, whether we're talking about solar panels or all the other kinds of things that we've talked about at length. But sometimes it is important to make sure that the goals and the focus is narrow and not, too broad, because then you get too much of an amalgamation. I would toss in, and that goes also where we got into, clearer guidelines on screening, landscaping, and whatnot, where you have the enabling sections of the zoning. I think we have clarity about that. I would take that out of our purview. Just tossing out for the purpose of consideration, would be whether a civil engineer might be a useful component as compared to some others. I think some of that can come into play. If not, I'm okay with that. I was going to echo what Kate said about the realtor. I don't think that's a useful, addition. But in all honesty, Sean, I was very impressed with this work. This was a number one. I think this is, first stab of something that was not an easy task. I give you super kudos on taking the first bite. So sorry if I'm critical.
No, they're all good comments, and I find myself agreeing with many of them. You're making it better, so it's good. Thank you.
Thanks all. Were there any other comments, questions, feedback at this time?
Yeah, I just want to say, like Sean, I just love it. Like I love this discussion. I love it. Thank you for bringing it forward and all the work and town staff. It's
Yeah,
great to discuss.
I have to give a lot of credit. Elijah and Amanda have been, and Nora have all been thought partners on this, and it's lots of emails behind the scenes and a lot of great input from them. I feel like I'm this much of the process, and they have really been great on everything. So thank you.
I'm going to say extra super kudos simply because I always know, just from my experience, the first bite of a draft is the hardest, and it's always easy for people to come and shoot and throw darts at your first draft, which is what I've been doing. Sorry, Sean. But your first cut was excellent, and that is the one that's always the challenge, and then it just gets the subsequent revisions just smooth it out and get better and better and better. So super excellent first job.
Yes, agreed. I couldn't have said it better than my colleagues. Personal gratitude. I appreciate anything that could help us be more consistent and more clear as far as like offering tools to applicants to make all of our lives easier and have better outcomes. So I really appreciate you taking the ball and running with this. This has been an excellent discussion. Thank you to everyone for all the time and thought. And I'm looking forward to continuing this conversation at, I guess, our next meeting, right? On the 28th?
Yes, on the 28th, we will take all the comments made tonight, update the draft, and come up with a motion to present to the board for establishment of a guidelines task force.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone. So if nobody else, if none of my colleagues have any further comments or questions or input at this time, I'm happy to move us on to the next agenda item. Excellent. I see consensus from nodding heads. So, and we don't need to take any kind of formal action on that, right, Elijah? No motions, nothing.
That's correct.
Awesome. All right, our next agenda item, number 4, is fair housing training. So I will, first of all, would like to extend thanks to our staff for taking the time to do this for us. I think it's really important and will be very helpful as we move into our public hearing process and help guide some of our conversations around some of our proposed warrant articles. So I'm very excited for this. Thank you. And I'll hand it over to Elijah and Amanda.
Yeah, so we're gonna cover fair housing broadly, and this is informal in the sense that if you have a question at any point, just chime in, and if I don't see the hand or whatever, Ellen, just flag it, like by all means interrupt me. I've also included some housing 101 stuff that just pertains to what the planning board does. If there's something in the future that you want more of, we did one with the housing partnership where I talked more about like what the 40B program is, the different subsets and all that stuff. If that's something we want to talk about, we can absolutely do that at a later date. But I tried to keep it a narrower scope. My keyboard's not responding. Okay. All right, so we're obviously going to be talking about housing, which can include discussion about vulnerable populations. So we just want to be mindful of that in our conversation and just know that we are talking about things in the context of Westwood, but we're not necessarily saying that this is the case in Westwood. So when we say examples of like fair housing violations, things like that, it's not by any means saying that this is happening. It's just to give you examples. All right. Okay, just so you all can understand, so the housing division is now tied to the planning division, but its mission is built right into fair housing. So the town of Westwood is committed to ensuring that housing opportunities are available to all residents, regardless of race, color, national origin, religion, sex, physical or mental disability, familial status, or any other classification protected by federal, state, or local law. So it's the motivation behind everything we do, and kind of our guiding principle. This is where I copied a little bit from the Housing 101 presentation that I had done. We always talk about affordable units and we never really explain what that really means. So I just wanted to explain the difference between, so when it's a rental unit and we say it's affordable, it's bound by what's called a regulatory agreement. So this is a document that both the town, the state, and the developer signs. And those units can only be rented to income eligible tenants. And the town and the state, or sometimes a third party agency, conducts annual monitoring. So every year we get a list of who's on their wait list. We make sure that people that are living there are actually eligible to live there. And we make sure things are being followed according to that regulatory agreement. Oftentimes, property management hires a third party that handles their lottery and their wait list. So like, for example, all of Giorgio Petruzziello properties use a service called Maloney Properties to handle all their affordable pieces. So oftentimes that is outsourced, but it's ultimately the developer who's responsible and beholden to the document. And then tenants in affordable rentals do have to recertify their income annually to ensure eligibility. All right. Ownership units are slightly different. So instead of a regulatory agreement, it's a deed rider. And it can only, when it comes up for resale, so they own the house outright, it's theirs. When it comes up for resale, it has to go to an income eligible buyer, and that's usually done via lottery. We choose the real estate agent and the state signs off on it as well. They can't just hire anyone they want. They can't pick the buyer. there's a lot of parameters around ensuring it's truly a fair opportunity to all. It can't be sold above what's called the maximum resale price. And that can be further adjusted based on what's actually affordable to a family at the affordability level it's intended to serve. And then anytime a capital improvement is made, or they want to change the names on the deed rider, or make any other significant changes, the town and the state have to sign off on it. I'm going to quickly refill my water because I have dry mouth, so just one sec.
Whoa, what are we doing here?
We'll take a moment to let Amanda refresh her water.
I'd like to move to allow Amanda to refresh her water.
I said I would be
Second.
all right,
Motion
because
carries.
my last sip right before I started, and I was like, oh no. All right. Oh, come on. This is what I get for having a drink of water. All right. So how the rent or the sale price is calculated depends on the program. And this is what we were getting at when we were explaining how we already have lower income housing. So some programs are based on the household income. So if you qualify, you only pay 30% of what your household earns. If your income goes down, your contribution goes down. If it goes up, you have to pay more. And then whatever the subsidy program is, pays the rest. This is often the most affordable to people because with the other affordable programs, the rents go up year to year. It doesn't matter how your income changes in that time. Whereas this is always catered to what your family's current needs are. This is most often done in public housing, which obviously Westwood does not have, or if there's private housing that receives a public subsidy. So for example, the Highland Glen Apartments has project-based Section 8 on some of their units. So that allows a portion of their tenants to only have to pay 30% of their income, even though the regulatory agreement for that property is 80% AMI. The other way it works, and this is the way we have it for most of the projects in Westwood, and it's kind of the norm, is based on area median income. It's not the greatest map, but the area in green is what the Boston, Cambridge, Quincy metro statistical area is. So when we say 80% AMI for the BCQ, that's what we're referring to. So you can see how it's not really a reflection of Westwood alone, and we're kind of just grouped in this big area, and that means very different income levels are all being calculated in that. And then that's what's used to calculate the rent or sale price. You don't need to know this in detail, but if you wanted to understand it, when we're calculating AMI, this is what we're doing. So you start with what the area median income in the BCQ is for a family of 4. You multiply that by your desired AMI, and you take that number and it gets multiplied again depending on the size of the household. Then you divide that by 12 months, and then you take 30% of that, because the idea is that you're not paying more than 30% of your household income on housing. Then from there, it gets a little more complicated. So for some properties, they base it on how many people are in your household. So you go by the limit for the household of 2, if there's 2 of you in the home. For other properties like Gables, most of Petruzziello's properties, they take the number of bedrooms and add 1. So in other words, a 1-bedroom, you would use the 2-person limit, or 2-bedroom would use the 3-person limit. Again, you don't need to know this, but I think it's just helpful to understand sometimes when we throw out AMI and what all these things mean, to understand what we're talking about. For the sale price, so for an ownership unit, it's slightly different. So they take that same starting number, multiply it by the AMI, and then multiply it by the household size, and then that tells you the income limit for the program. From there, it depends on what type of deed rider they have. Prior to 2006, the deed riders were written very differently, and they used what was called a discount rate. Now they use something called a resale multiplier. That's a much better system, but we have a lot of properties that are from prior to 2006, so there's kind of two different systems we operate under. And then the other piece is when it gets sold, if even after you do that formula, if it's still too expensive, the state can further adjust that sale price. So there's a lot of steps that go into ultimately what that sale price is for these homes. All right. Vouchers, and again, I'm just going to go over this briefly. So the idea of a housing voucher is to enable housing choice. This is where if you have one, you only have to pay 30% of your income wherever you use that voucher. It's usually available to households earning 80% AMI or less, so the same people that qualify for our affordable housing in Westwood. But it does prioritize low-income households and anyone in like an emergency situation. They can be used anywhere. This is one common misconception where people will say, oh, there's no affordable housing in my town. It's like, well, yes, there is, because vouchers can be used anywhere. It is illegal for a landlord to deny a voucher. The only time a voucher can't be used is if the market rent is too high. But the payment standard for most of these vouchers is actually fairly generous. So that doesn't happen all the time. Within vouchers, there's two different types. So there's mobile and project-based. Mobile means wherever you go, if you move, it stays with you and you can use it in your new apartment. If it's project-based, so like the Highland Glen Apartments, if you move out of that unit, you lose that voucher. It stays with the unit for the next tenant. Within that, there's three main programs. There's other ones, but these are the three primary ones: Section 8, MRVP, and AHVP. Section 8 is the federal one that most people are familiar with. I realized I've dropped a one, but the average wait time is a 17 to 20 year wait for a voucher, not 7 to 20, I have to fix that. MRVP is the state-run version of that, and it's 5 to 10 years to get one. And then AHVP is specifically for non-seniors with disabilities, and the wait varies on that one because it's a very specific group that it's serving. But this is what we're seeing increased reliance on, and where the lower AMI proposal is based on. Like, we're seeing more and more people rely on these, but then they're waiting 10 years before they can even get it. So it's not really helping them. All right, now we're going to go into fair housing more specifically. So there's fair housing on the federal level and then on the state level. Federal Fair Housing Act protects people from housing discrimination based on race, color, national origin, religion, sex, which has been broadened to include gender identity and sexual orientation, familial status. This usually refers to families with children, but basically your household makeup, and disability. It also protects you from retaliation if you were to report a fair housing violation. In Massachusetts, there's several laws that broaden that. So they also have protections for source of income. So if you receive a housing voucher or you live in an affordable unit, you can't be discriminated based on that. They explicitly say sexual orientation and gender identity. Age, there is an exception. Age-restricted housing, so senior housing, is the one exception to this law everywhere. So that's important to understand. Marital status, veteran or active military status, genetic information, or children and lead paint. This is another minor one that doesn't necessarily pertain to the work you do, but essentially that means if you own a property and a family applies to live there and you know there's lead paint, you can't turn them down because there's kids and it would be unsafe. You are required to remediate that. So it's kind of like the one like non-people characteristic that's protected under fair housing. So common examples of housing discrimination includes failing to make reasonable accommodation for someone with a disability, a real estate agent steering a buyer away from a particular property because of their race, evicting a family with children because of the presence of lead paint, refusing to rent to a voucher recipient, restricting access to amenities to only allow tenants of market rate units in a mixed income property to use them, or a bank refusing to lend to a home buyer due to their sexual identity. So these are kind of like the common interpretations that tend to be pretty straightforward for people to understand. But what's also important to understand is it's been broadened in terms of how fair housing has been applied. So it applies to all types of housing. So multifamily, single family, market rate, subsidized, everything. Everyone is subject to fair housing. So a housing provider, a real estate agent, you as a planning board, us as staff, all of us are beholden to fair housing. And then which matters are subject? Essentially, anything related to housing is subject to fair housing. So that includes discussion at public meetings, any regulations made, policies, practice, any of your approvals that you do as a board, every single thing is subject to fair housing. And that's where oftentimes people don't realize that even things that are said during a meeting can be a violation. So I'm not going to go over every single case related to fair housing because we could be here all night. But I just want to highlight, I picked a few just to highlight how it's been expanded in terms of how the courts have interpreted fair housing. So, for example, in 2020, there was a case where the court said a special permit can't be denied based on fiscal impact of schools because it denies the constitutional right to a public education in Massachusetts. So in this case, it was a town that rejected a development because they said, oh, the school can't handle it. That would be discrimination based on familial status. So families with children, you're saying we don't want families with children. And also in this case, affects your constitutional rights. So that's another unique thing to Massachusetts. Another one also from Massachusetts was in 2004, where a municipality, and I can't remember which one it is off the top of my head, they tried to say, we're going to put a moratorium on development. We don't want more of it right now. We need a break to kind of get our bearings and, you know, serve the residents we already have. And essentially the courts allowed it for a finite amount of time. And then when they asked to extend it, the court said no, because that's just not allowed. So you can't, it also prevents you from being able to block development outright. Then in 2000, there was a case in Texas where they actually, this was more nuanced fair housing violations, where the zoning specifically required a minimum of 1 acre for lot sizes, and it prohibited any multifamily housing. And so because they said, you know, people of color, lower income households, marginalized populations are more likely to live in multifamily housing, that has a discriminatory effect when you block that type of housing. So that's to give you a sense of just how much this law can be broadened and how it's applied. Like I said, there's plenty of cases out there that have set different precedents, but it shows how you have to be careful about everything you do. So it's also, this is where what we say is important. It's technically illegal to directly or indirectly imply that the presence of any protected class, so all the lists I showed earlier, has any negative effect. So if you're going to say, oh, this apartment building is going to lower my property values because of the people who live there, or it's going to make the area less safe or more prone to crime, it'll contribute to the decline of neighborhood quality, school quality, changing the character of a neighborhood, making properties in the neighborhood easier and more difficult to sell. So basically, as a rule of thumb, anything that's implying that a certain type of housing because of the people who will live there will have a negative effect is subject to fair housing and wouldn't be appropriate. It's also illegal to enact any policy or practice that is intended to keep out or has disparate impact on a protected class. So going back to the case from Texas, prohibiting multifamily housing would be against fair housing. Denying a project application based on school enrollment impact would be a fair housing violation. And obviously the list goes on. This is just to give you a high level example. So in terms of recognizing violations, I think it's important to understand that oftentimes it's not explicit. Like people often aren't gonna like just say, I don't want poor people living here. Like, and I'm saying that crudely, like to like demonstrate people aren't always gonna be that outright about it. So it's usually implied in what they say. And it's usually rooted in NIMBYism. I think you're all familiar with what a NIMBY is, not in my backyard. But it's community opposition to change, and it's usually based on fear of what that change will bring. It's important to recognize that fears might be rooted in unconscious biases. So in other words, people don't recognize they have those fears. So when they're saying their comments that might not be appropriate, there's not necessarily ill intent in that. And so recognizing that, and then also recognizing forms of coded language. So common terms you'll hear are school impact, which means you're opposed to other children attending the schools, or safe neighborhood often means if you build multifamily housing, that brings in crime and danger. Or taxpayer, this is a common one you'll hear where it's almost saying like, I am better than because I pay property taxes as a homeowner rather than a renter. It insinuates that one has more value or input in the community. So it's looking for those little words and what they're really signaling, which can vary in the context, of course, and understanding that even if they're not saying outright, it might still be inappropriate based on fair housing. Any questions so far? No? Okay. All right, so I had talked to Ellen a little bit about this, and she said it'd be helpful to kind of know how to respond when inappropriate comments come up. And the short answer is, I think all of you are really good at responding to it already in terms of, you know, what's appropriate, what's not. So I don't want to give you an exact script of what to say. However, I would recommend keeping in mind that, again, people don't always realize what they're saying or have ill intent. So don't necessarily assume that, you know, it's immediately a conflict. And then also realize that anytime something harmful is said at a public meeting or by a public official or by anybody that has a role in housing, even if it's said by an attendee or someone not on the board, it still has a harmful effect. And so we want to make sure we're actually responding to it and not just overlooking it, because you can watch that and interpret that as, oh, are they silently agreeing? Are they okay with this? Just something to keep in mind. So I would always lead with explaining your legal obligations. So just putting an end to it right there of, we can't discuss that because it would be inappropriate under fair housing, or however you want to phrase that. Then you can also look at what is the underlying issue that they're actually getting at, because sometimes they might be saying something that's a fair housing violation, but when you actually unpack what they're saying, it's a legitimate concern that you can actually respond to. So saying, you know, hey, we can't discuss that, but what I am hearing is you're concerned about taxes. I can reassure you that, and then go into taxes. Like there's ways to not be outright dismissive, while still keeping with fair housing. So I just pulled a few examples. So we shouldn't build more apartments because homeowners have to foot the bill through our taxes. So you can point out things like, well, renters do pay taxes. They just pay it within their rent, who then pays the tax bill. The property manager then pays the tax bill. You can point out that all residential properties are subject to the same tax rate. So that property will get taxed just like their single family home will. That if there's a commercial use, so if it's a mixed use building, they'll actually have a higher tax rate and bring in more for the town. And you can even point out, hey, actually every multifamily housing development we've had in the last at least 10 years, if not longer, has been a net positive to the town's tax base. You can give the example of, for example, 22 Everett Street was predicted to net about $500,000 a year in taxes. So getting people to understand that, yes, more housing uses services, but still ends up being a net benefit when you actually look at the fiscal impact. Again, always lead with, this is inappropriate, but if you want to ease some of those concerns without saying anything inappropriate, you can point out examples. All right, so more affordable housing will lower the quality of the town. So you can point out things like, well, affordable housing is a way for those with limited income, and like, you know, you guys have said this at meetings, you know, teachers, municipal staff, single parents, people that, you know, having a limited income doesn't make you bad. And it's a way to help people at a time when housing is more expensive than ever. You can point out that there's no evidence that affordable housing leads to crime. You can talk about how property values have actually risen as a result of development and expands the town's tax base. And you also can point out that affordable housing, so most of our affordable housing is in a mixed income development. And legally, those units have to be indistinguishable from any market rate unit. So in other words, from the outside, or even if you're walking through the building, you don't know where the affordable housing is. And so the idea that this somehow changes the quality of the neighborhood just wouldn't be allowed within the parameters of the requirements for affordable housing anyway. Another example, our schools cannot handle more students. So beyond fair housing, pointing out that there is a constitutional right to a public education in Massachusetts. So a town cannot refuse to educate a student. Also, your state aid is based on enrollment. And one of the things that is has been the case in Westwood is over time enrollment has actually declined. And when your enrollment declines, your state aid declines because it's based on those enrollment numbers. So if you get more students, the state assists more. And then bringing it back to that the community has expressed more, the desire for more housing choice, so that people who grew up here or raised children here can stay here, or people that want to live here can come here. Or you can even point out that Westwood's population is aging, which can be a symptom of affordability. So we're not seeing enough younger families coming in, and it's creating an imbalance, and that's why we have declining school enrollment. So these are just ways you can respond if it's something that you feel requires maybe further explanation rather than just outright saying, sorry, you can't discuss this. But I would always say tread carefully when you do that. At the end of the day, no public body is exempt from it. So you as a planning board, the housing partnership, the FinCom, everybody is subject to fair housing. So we all have to hold each other to these same standards. Recognize that violations aren't always going to be obvious. And if it's making any negative implications about a protected class or a certain type of housing having a negative effect on the town, it's not appropriate to discuss. And also being mindful is what's being said, perpetuating any negative stereotypes or stigma about something. In terms of responding to violations, address the comment always. would be my recommendation, because again, no matter who says it, once it's said, that still has an impact on the person. Always lead with your fair housing obligations. If you need to use me as a scapegoat and say, sorry, that staff would say that's not appropriate, I'm happy to take the blame on that one. And I'm sure Elijah would too. And always avoid repeating inappropriate comments of others. So even if you're just repeating what they said, just don't do it. Just avoid it altogether. I'm gonna post this presentation so that you have it. I'll put it on the fair housing page of the website. But this was to just give you a general overview. And I'm happy to field any questions that you have.
Thank you, Amanda. I'll open it up to board member comments, but first I would just like to say, like, I found this incredibly helpful, and really important. And I would go so far as to say, I think it would be useful for pretty much any agent of the town, any sitting board member on any board to take a look at this presentation, because I'm sure a lot of folks aren't aware of how far the applicability of the legal obligation goes. So thank you for that. And now I'd like to open it up to my colleagues if anyone has any comments. Kate.
Yeah, Amanda, so cool. Like, first of all, gorgeous slides. Never mind what was on them. Like, that was just really gorgeous. And I really do appreciate seeing written what people could be saying and what I might be hearing, because that has happened several times. So I really appreciate, like, it's not my imagination. I'm hearing these words, but I feel like they're going towards this. And I appreciate you suggesting that that maybe I don't assume ill intent when that happens. So I appreciate you saying that as well. I was curious, the Texas case that you talked about with the 1 acre lot requirement, right? Was that, do you happen to know, were they changing the zoning to try to not get development, or was it an existing zoning that a developer was trying to change?
I believe with that one, it was existing zoning combined with the fact that then a developer tried to propose a project within those regulations, and the municipality said we won't even consider it. So it's not that having 1 acre lot sizes in itself is illegal. It's more of the fact that it was a very intentional effort on the town's part to put a rule on the entire town.
Oh, it was the whole town.
No, yeah. So yeah, I should have clarified that. So it, like I said, it's not illegal in itself or a fair housing violation to have large lot sizes. It's the fact that it's looking at the intent and how it's applied. So if the whole town has that requirement, there's a very clear intention that you're blocking a certain type of housing.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. And thank you for asking for that clarification, Kate, because I was wondering about that too. Sean, I think your hand was up next.
I just wanted to say thank you. It's really helpful to see this all laid out, both the examples that talk about potential responses, because I think I often find myself tongue-tied in these conversations. Like, what do I say right now? And I try to be somebody who acknowledges people's feelings in general, but there are cases where I'm like, oh, it's off base, but I don't know how to respond. So that's very helpful. Number two, I think it underscores the importance of being careful when we hear comments that are even, they might seem innocuously related to financial issues before the town, but in reality, when they come into this domain, have impacts that can be harmful on the communities and the protected classes that we're talking about under the Fair Housing Act. So it's maybe as much a note to myself as to everyone else, but I appreciate you putting this all together. And I echo Kate, beautiful slides.
Thank you, Sean. Phil.
Just great job. Little tickle in my throat. The coded language part, especially, one of the things that we do need to remember is, as a public body where people are talking it's almost like little buzzwords should come over, a bubble over your head to remember those things. And since I have a cough, I'm not going to talk anymore. Great job.
I just want to say it's funny, Phil, that you need a glass of water because we were the ones who made fun of Amanda for getting water.
It's
just wanted to-
important to
But I'm
stress
staying
in
right in and I'm
what
plugging,
you
I'm powering through it.
I was gonna offer you a moment to refresh your water, Phil, if you needed to.
or you just take the moment for yourself like I did.
Yeah, no, thank you. I really am appreciative of this because I know we have, well, things like this come up at our meetings by the nature of what we do often, but particularly, this year with some of our warrant articles, I think these conversations, we'll be having them. So I definitely find it very helpful. This guidance is critical. So I really appreciate it and lovely job. And I will be directing, when people ask me questions, I'll be directing them to the presentation on the website. So thank you for giving us that resource that will help us educate some of our neighbors and colleagues as well. That's, I think, going to be really helpful. Phil, if your hand's still up, if you're
No,
okay.
I'm done, but
Okay.
I'm not coughing.
Okay. I just, if you had something else and post cough, I wanted to give you the opportunity. Elijah, yes.
Yes, so just wanted to echo, Amanda did a great job on this. This is definitely a resource that should be referred back to, the presentation on YouTube or for folks that are watching it, and then also on the website at the QR code and website that was shared earlier. And I just wanted to point out there is a public comment, Madam Chair, if you are open to
Oh, sure,
entertaining.
absolutely. I'm happy to read this. Matt Giordano, 20 French Street. As a housing partnership and fair housing committee member, I just want to echo what Amanda's saying about not assuming malintent. I like to remember the social psychology concept of the fundamental attribution error. It essentially says, don't assume a person is acting negatively because of their character. Thank you. I think, that's definitely a valuable reminder. It's good for all of us to keep that in mind. And also, thank you for attending our meeting. As both a resident and a member of the Housing Partnership, we appreciate that. Okay, was there anything else on this subject at this time? I have a feeling we might be revisiting this. I'm sure I'll have questions that come up, always as we move forward. But at this point in time, did anyone else have anything else they wanted to ask or add? All right. Well, thanks again, everyone who was involved in putting that together. And at this time, I will move on to our next agenda item, which is minutes. The draft minutes from our December 10th, 2024 meeting. Did everybody get a chance to look at them? And did anybody have any edits or comments that they would like to share? I'm not seeing any hands. So if that's the case, at this time, I would entertain this lovely motion.
I move that the planning board approve the minutes of the meeting of December 10th, 2024 as presented.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on the minutes? Seeing none, I'll take roll call. Kate?
Aye.
Bill?
Aye.
Sean?
Aye.
I vote aye as well. Motion carries. Minutes are approved. All right. Next agenda item, number 6, is updates from agency and committee representatives. Has anyone attended any meetings that they would like to report out on?
We have a ped bike meeting coming up on the 23rd. So I'll have something to say at our next meeting. And the off-leash dog, I don't know the name of it.
Blah, blah, blah,
we-
blah, 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 blah.
Right? I'm like, Phil, tell me what the name of it is.
I
We
don't
meet
know.
again on Thursday, and it's a well-attended group. Folks are excited to see something happen in that area. So thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Kate, are those meetings recorded or do we need to? Okay, so it
They're
would be
not.
minutes or attend. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. All right. Thank you for that. Sean?
The only one I attended since our last meeting was just sort of a trick gathering, Three Rivers Interlocal Council. But it was very nice. There was no theme for that particular meeting. We just did round robin around the room, but I did bring up our design guidelines project, and people were very eager to help out. Other towns have things, they wanted to share it. The representative from Milton connected me with one of their planning board members, and I will be having coffee with that individual before our next meeting. So if I learn any interesting lessons learned and do's or don'ts, I'll let you all know. But it's a nice community to have to talk with peers who've gone down some of these roads before. That's all I have.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm actually excited to hear what you learned from Milton because they're such a large municipality with some very different neighborhoods. It's like Newton, where there's some that are very historic, some that are more modern, some that are feel almost more urban, some that are very residential. So I'm really excited to hear what you learned from that. So thank you. Phil.
We had an in-person lesson on Amanda's talk at the Visioning Center. And we had some, it was a very interesting event. Now, Amanda, you were roaming around, but did you happen to hear some of the discussion in our group? Elijah, you got to jump in when we were at the Visioning Center of the young lady that was in our group and some of her commentary.
Yes.
Come on.
I'm not going to go into it. It was, let's just say that this training that Amanda just did for us could come in handy at different public events.
I completely agree. At an in-person context, sitting there, it was a good experience. It was a great session, but it was very well done. And I just want to give kudos to Amanda for leading the discussion. It was well done. So, and then Madam Chair, I watched the select board. If you could apprise us of some of the speed limitation discussion, because I saw that, but I'll let, since you were in attendance and Josh is not here, I'll defer to you.
Yeah, I actually was going to when that was going to be my big idea. I had nothing until last night. So because Canton Street hasn't met on anything. So yes, so Elijah and Nora and I were at the select board meeting last night. They were discussing the letter of recommendation we sent that they pursue a warrant article this town meeting to impose. I hate that word, but it's the only one that's coming to mind. The 25-mile-an-hour speed limit townwide and thickly settled and town centers, business districts, that kind of thing. And it was an interesting conversation. There were a lot of concerns. Chief Silva was there as well. To be frank, I felt like there was a fair amount of pushback with the assertion that it wasn't really going to solve the problem. My ask was, can we speak to, can we get some data from the communities that have it in place and whether or not they're noticing a difference and whether or not that there's data to show whether or not it is helpful or not, because that I thought would be worthwhile. And the select board agreed. They felt that it was worth further investigation. They were not prepared to sponsor a warrant article at this time, but they want more data, and they did agree to put the time into gathering the data and reevaluating once they had statistics and benchmarks to look at. So did I miss anything, Elijah?
Elijah, I just want to say, because you pushed back a little bit on some of that, and because I watched, and I would encourage us to consider to pursue it.
Yes. I did appreciate that, Elijah. There was Elijah brought up a statistic that, and to counter the assertion that changing the speed limit doesn't solve the problem, that there is data that shows that there's a significant
Fatalities.
Yeah,
On
fatalities
was what he was pointing out. And again, as just merely an observer, I thought it was well taken, and I was disappointed at some of the lack of interest.
Sorry,
Yeah,
what was the point that was made?
So Elijah pointed out that when you look at data from a pedestrian accident, someone being hit by a car, the difference in percentage of injuries and fatalities is actually it's significantly less. And I don't remember the exact numbers, Elijah,
It
but
was like
Oh, I can
37% at 30 miles an hour and 22% at 25 miles an hour. Elijah, correct me.
Yeah, so 47% of pedestrians that are struck at 30 miles per hour. So 47% of pedestrians struck at 30 miles an hour suffer serious injury and 20% die, compared to 30% suffering significant injury and 12% dying when it's reduced to 25 miles an hour.
Right. So
And that's
that
only a
that's
5-mile-an-hour
famously-
difference. And I
Right.
was very disappointed at the kind of, I don't want to say not non-consideration, but that was to me a very significant piece of data that didn't get a lot of hearing.
Yeah, I am glad that they agreed to continue to look at it. And I outlined that this had been brought to us by residents that wanted us to do something about it, because I think residents don't necessarily know which board is responsible for what things, and they know the planning board does warrant articles, so that this was brought to board members, and then the board had a conversation about it, and we unanimously supported moving forward with something. But there will be no warrant article from the select board at this time, not for spring, but they will gather more data, and hopefully the data will bear out what I think we feel is a worthwhile thing to do, and that
I
our
would encourage
residents.
us as a board to follow up on this, because like I say, I was disappointed at the lack of interest in some of the pushback that I was observing in the meeting.
Yeah, and to that end, I wonder if it's, and Kate, I see your hand up, but I was going to direct this to you. If it's worthwhile to maybe loop in the ped bike safety group, if they would have any interest in perhaps also making a recommendation to the select board. But
And I
I
know
don't know.
Josh is very interested in this one too.
Yeah, I know. Unfortunately, he's not here. But Kate, yes.
Yeah, the ped bike is a little short on worker bees at this point, I'll just say. But when the select board at this point in time is willing to do what, to receive data to review, or they themselves, who's going to get the data?
Believe that the ask was for Chief Silva to, he mentioned that he had, contacts, chiefs of some of these other towns that
Yep.
he could reach out to and try and get some of that information from.
I think we need, Chief Silva was not I don't want to say a non-proponent, he was less than a non-proponent. I would encourage us for follow-up to make sure that the data is acquired. 'Cause
Agreed.
I think it's important.
Yeah, and Madam Chair, to go back to your ped bike question, I think that it would have more heft and weight if the ask came from a different group.
Mhm. Thank you.
Right.
Sean, I see your hand up.
I'm just thinking, again, I think it's easy in any type of project in the public domain to say, we'll gather data, and data can always be cherry picked. It can always be, I think, tilted towards a particular end or another. I think I'd want to make sure, can we get a representative sample of towns? A really interesting statistic to me would be, compare the towns who have enacted this part of Mass General Law and look at their traffic fatalities or even injuries, in the period before and after they enacted it, and compare it against towns who didn't enact it in the same time frame, and see, did it make a measurable difference? That would be sort of a best practice study. That takes someone's time, obviously, and a bit of data analysis, and I'm not yet volunteering myself, but if I'm feeling particularly free a month down the line, maybe I can take a look at it. But the data would actually just be fundamentally very interesting to see
Yeah,
if we
Sean,
could.
give me a shout, because
together.
I would also, I think there would be a direct correlation, is my guess, without having looked,
Yeah.
to having, a significant impact.
And if I may, just while we're on the subject, Sean, I really appreciate what you're saying, but that's assuming that everything stays the same. Most of these
Yeah.
towns are seeing increased traffic, so you may not see the benefit of the lower speed limit because you just have more traffic. So I don't know if it's a percentage of accidents versus hard numbers. I don't know.
It would have to be on like a per car or it has to
Yeah,
be on a
I
per
don't know.
unit basis. So yeah,
yeah.
who knows what data is even out there?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are all questions that, I was curious, Elijah, and follow up. I know it's kind of not under our umbrella to to do a lot of this. They agreed to, but can we make recommendations about the kind of data that we think would be valuable, like based on this conversation? Can we share the feedback from this kind of debrief with the select board about the kind of things that might actually be significant as far as when they go to make an evaluation about what to do? To Sean's point, there's a lot of data out there, and if you want to make an informed decision about what the right thing to do is, it might be helpful to make sure that there's some parameters around the type of data that's looked at.
And-
Yeah, I can,
Oh, sorry.
go ahead.
I'm just, and does like the Mass Municipal Association or anybody already have?
Or even, yeah, like, because the state,
So
if you opt into this part of Mass General Law, you have to notify MassDOT, I think. So I'm curious if like, I would hope that it would be something that MassDOT
There
would
has
study.
to be
but I know
some
that-
resource
I
on
know that the state's always squeezed. So sorry, I didn't mean to butt into.
No,
it. You had good
we're all kind of brainstorming, but I do see Amanda's hand up, so I'm thinking she has an answer.
MassDOT collects a lot of data around traffic safety. They probably have the most available, but even they recognize there's inherent flaws in the data that make it really difficult. Traffic safety data in general is really difficult to work with. Like, for example, when you look at car accidents, the police officer, when they put in the report, just goes to whatever the nearest intersection is, but it could be 50 feet back and have nothing to do with that intersection. So like little nuances like that, even I had a professor who worked for MassDOT, he said even our data like is inherently flawed because of the intricacies around collecting that kind of data.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, there was some of the discussion was that the perception is that there isn't a speeding problem based on data collected by the police department. My personal experience has been a little different than that, but so I guess that it's kind of a bigger topic, you know.
And anecdotally, there's many residents that would not agree with that.
Yeah, I kind of alluded to that. I was trying to be you know, diplomatic and speak that, you know, we've heard from residents, and then there was the conversation about that residents may feel like if they're walking, they may feel like a car is going by them faster than they really are. And I can't speak to that. Like I was speaking to like when I'm driving in my car and I'm doing X and someone's still really too close, you know, but it was an interesting conversation. I think it's worthwhile. I think it's important. So I think it's worth us doing whatever we can from our table to try and stay on top of this and move it forward. I agree with you, Phil. Yes.
So, yeah, so I was just gonna say on staff side, we can definitely continue this conversation with, you know, the staffers for the other boards, and then also, you know, chief of police, and we'll make sure that this is ongoing.
Excellent. Thank you. Yeah, I think none of us really want to see it just kind of trickle off without if whatever the conclusion is. I think I personally would like to just feel like it really has been studied and vetted, and that the decision has been come to via process. It's the best way I can think of to phrase. So, thank you. Any other conversation on that? Because I know that that was a big, important conversation in our board, and that was kind of the outcome from last night. Sean, yes.
I'm correct in the fact that the warrant is now closed, so it's, for example, it couldn't be entertained via citizens petition this year. It's just correct. Okay.
That's correct.
I think the select board always keeps some placeholder articles, but they would have to sponsor the article. It couldn't be a citizen petition at this time.
Just
That's right.
helpful for anyone watching this call, I think
Is that
later. I think
correct?
it's
I
helpful.
thought
It
still-
closed yesterday.
They closed
It
it.
closed yesterday.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought it was coming up in a couple of days. Sorry.
No, they closed it at their meeting yesterday.
Okay.
All right. Did anyone else have any other? Yes, Kate.
No, I'm just ready for motion to close.
Oh, I see. I think we had one
Just
more.
like the select board, just like the warrant.
I'll zoom through. Oh, well, we have general miscellaneous updates and administrative items. That's number 7. Anything from staff that we haven't addressed?
I'll be super quick. The housing correction plan is still it's all online, open for public comment, the parts that have been released thus far. The community engagement section was going to be released in December, but we got pretty extensive responses that were really across the board. So I wanted to take a little more time to carefully go through that. So I'm hoping by the end of the month, the community engagement section, so the survey responses, any event feedback, will be released for public comment.
Excellent. Thank you. And thanks again for all your work on that. I know that's a large project. Elijah, was there anything else, administrative updates?
I would just say to the end of the housing production plan, if you go to the town website and search housing production plan, you should be able to find all the information.
Thank you. Oh, and I do see we have 2 comments in the Q&A. I'm happy to read these quickly into the record. Matt Giordano, 20 French Street. I just wanted to formally express my sadness for the outcome on the speed limit warrant article, 25 mph versus 30 mph, thickly settled versus very thickly settled is a significant difference and the data is compelling. Within the last 4 months in Westwood as a pedestrian, I've almost been hit by a car 2 times. Thank you. And I'm sorry to hear you've almost been hit by a car, but thank you for sharing that. And I guess as a general note, to anyone watching this meeting, if residents are supportive or interested in this, I'd encourage you to share your thoughts with the select board, because at the end of the day, it really will be up to them whether or not to formally pursue any changes. So always happy to have feedback here too. I do appreciate that. But yes, I think these comments and thoughts would be worthwhile to share with the select board as well. All right, our last agenda item, upcoming board meetings. We have meetings January 28th, 2025, February 11th, 2025, March 4th, 2025. Also of note, the Finance and Warrant Commission article sponsors meetings will be January 14th and 15th if needed, 2025, and February 25th and 26th if needed, 2025. And I believe that is it for our agenda. Elijah's nodding. So at this time, Kate,
Motion to close.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on adjournment? Seeing none, I will take roll call. Kate,
Aye.
Bill,
Aye.
John.
Aye.
I vote aye as well. Thanks, everyone. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Thank you so much.
Happy New Year.
See you, everybody.
See you